corner. Getting started. Today's webinar, we're going to go over the following topics. Outbound versus inbound marketing, which is something really important to discuss before we jump in and anything else for social media. Types of content, content themes, then we'll go over the content plan template, and then the IDA method for actually creating your content. So hopefully, a lot of this will be helpful to various organizations. And I've tried to sort of create and take examples from across the industry, different sectors. Would anyone mind letting me know if the chat is blocking the presentation or if I'm the only one who can see it? Is the chat blocking the presentation on the screen? Or am I the only one who can see it? It's not blocking. Huh, lovely, the magic and technology of Zoom, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, so outbound versus inbound marketing. This is our key distinction when we're thinking about the mindset that we need to take when we're running social media strategy. Particularly, when we're institutions that if we are potentially selling something, it's going to be something that either has a long sales cycle or potentially is a higher ticket item. So, we want to make this differentiation between outbound and inbound. So outbound marketing is where you push your product on customers. This is what you might think of as more traditional, old school marketing, where you can consider radio or a lot of television commercials, newspaper ads, things like that are outbound marketing. Inbound marketing is to earn the attention of customers with valuable content. And that is what we're going to be doing. So to give you an example, what the difference is between outbound and inbound, let's pretend that I have a bakery and I make the best chocolate chip cookies, which here in Italy are very hard to find. So that's just too bad. But I have an amazing bakery and I make great chocolate chip cookies. So outbound marketing is where I stand outside my store with a megaphone and I shout, "Hey everybody, my chocolate chip cookies are the best in the world. You have to come in and try them." Okay, so I'm pushing my message out, I'm pushing my product on customers, I'm sending it out to a really wide group of people, and I'm hoping that I'm gonna find the needles in the haystack that are gonna be the ones who are interested in my product, okay? Inbound marketing is where I go and I stand outside my storefront with a plate of chocolate chip cookies and I ask passersby to try them, okay? So only those who are interested in chocolate chip cookies are going to come up and take one. And if they try it and they like it, they'll probably come in and buy, okay? So our focus really here is to make sure that we're not interrupting people's lives. Outbound marketing, the average person receives more than 2,000 outbound interruptions per day. Now, of course, a lot of us are on lockdown or quarantine or shelter in place at the moment, so maybe we have a little bit less than 2,000. But if you think about the number of TV commercials that you see, the number of brand placements that you see, if you're driving to and from work, how many advertisements and brands you see as you drive, right? So 2,000 is really not that crazy of a number, and we don't want to be interrupting people. We want to be giving them value. So inbound marketing is really about doing something that is specific and useful for our audience. Okay, so our focus in our social media strategy creation is that we want to be doing something specific and useful, and we want to be providing valuable content. So that is always the mindset that we should take. All right, so what are the types of content that we're going to be working with? Well, we have 5. The first is brand content. The second is original content. The third is company. The fourth is user-generated content, and the 5th is curated content. Now we're going to go over each of these and examples so that we can really understand how they work. And the reason that we're going to go over all these different types is that, a big part of a social media strategy is using variety and using different types of content so that you can engage your audience in different ways. So I would say, the typical Instagram feed or Facebook feed or Twitter feed that I see, a lot of it is going to be brand content, okay? And we'll go over this together, what these mean, but a lot of it is going to be brand content. And in fact, brand content is the most similar to outbound marketing, It's the most similar to pushing your product on your customers, okay? So our goals really with our social media strategy, particularly during this period of the pandemic, is to actually focus on the other 4 types of content and try to create relationships with our users, with our followers, with our clients and our partners and our potential clients for future, so that we really can strengthen those bonds and then going forwards, you know, hopefully maintain. Oh, that's okay. Oh, just a second, guys. I'm not quite sure. Oops. There's 2 of us on here. Give me just one moment because it looks like we're in here. Ah, perfect. Okay, fixed. As you can tell, we have a company-wide Zoom account for these events. Okay, let me share my screen again and we'll get back to it. So when we're thinking about the type of content that we're going to be wanting to create during this period, we're really going to be focusing on these last 4. Okay, so let's go over what each of these are. Brand content. So the objective of brand content is communicate with your audience about your brand or products. Your brand or your products are always the center of attention. So this is, you know, the closest to what we would think about, like I said, as outbound. It's where you're really selling your product or your brand, whether or not you actually sell something, right? Typically speaking. But if we think about products, even if you're, you know, a nonprofit institution, you still have something that you're offering to your audience, okay? So how do we create brand content? Well, here are a variety of examples. You could be talking about the features and benefits of your product and of working with your brand. You could be going over frequently asked questions. You might have testimonials. You might have case studies that you can develop with your clients. Graphics, and I actually use Canva. I use Canva for this presentation. Highly recommend looking into Canva if you haven't used it before. It's a really easy tool that doesn't require any design experience at all to create posts. Organizational archives, and then employee-generated content. So let's go over these in a little bit more detail here, especially in terms of what you can be creating right now, particularly if your business is mostly or entirely shut down. So a really great thing to work on during this period is to talk to current clients about creating testimonials and case studies, because this is something that you can develop even if you're not there in person, even if you can't talk to them in person, and even if you can't necessarily, you know, take photos and videos at their location. You can talk about doing case studies, building case studies and testimonials with your existing clients without either of you needing to be open, which is fantastic and allows you to create some really great brand content that's not necessarily too salesy, too pushy, okay? Then we also have organizational archives. So go back into your archives, particularly if you're a gallery or museum, you're gonna have hundreds upon hundreds of photos from past exhibitions, from your collections that you can use in your brand content. And you can also use in other types of content, which we'll see going forward. And then you also can, you know, look at employee generated content. So can you reach out to employees and say, hey, you know, have you taken any photos in the past 6 months or in the past year that you would be willing for us to share on social media? So, you know, maybe you are, you know, you work with art technicians. And so people tend to take pictures, you know, while they're working. It's very common for people to carry around their smartphones in their pocket wherever they are, right? We are in the 21st century, we're in 2020. So in that case, you might just ask your employees, or you might ask even partners that you worked with, hey, do you guys have any pictures of, you know, that last installation that we did? Or do you have any pictures of the last conservation project that we did together? And you'd be surprised what you can come up with just off of people's smartphones. So that's a really great resource to use. And then let's look at an example together of brand content. So remember, brand content is where we really have the focus on your product or your brand. Okay, so we'll go through other types of content in a minute that don't have this strict focus. So here is one example. I have made these examples. They're all going to be Instagram examples because I think that's a platform that all of us are quite familiar with being in the art world. but they're going to be sort of different industries. So here is a fictional company, Shipping International. And then what we've done here is put a picture of a painting that they've shipped at some point in time, okay? Doesn't necessarily have to have been even within the last year, okay? As long as it's an interesting picture, which this is, because, you know, actually, can you look inside the packaging? What does it actually look like when the painting is sitting inside the packaging? Could be interesting to your particular audience, right? And then we have the copy. We always take the greatest care with your collection. Visit the link in our bio to find out if we're shipping to your area during this period, COVID-19. So here you're talking about features and benefits, right? You're saying, you know, you can check if you're shipping with us. You can just take a look at our website, and we are actually working right now. So this is a really, you know, good method to sort of let people know that you're not closed, that you actually are still operating. So, you know, this is just one example, but there are so many sources of brand content that you can use. But again, during this period, you may choose to use one of the other 4 types much more often than brand. So number 2 is original content. And original content is information or entertainment that is valuable to your audience. Engaging and not selling is your primary objective, okay? So you may have pictures of your products, you may incorporate your products or your trade into the original content, but the focus is not selling, it is engaging, it is educating. Okay, so let's look at what that might mean. Well, blogs are a great example of this, right? So the other day, we actually wrote a blog that was all about how we view the art world moving forward into more environmentally friendly practices. And we put that up for Earth Day. Okay, so that would be a good example of original content that's a blog. Now, you might not have time to write blogs. You could write long form posts. We could have put the same content, much more summarized, into a long post. That works too. That's just as valuable. It's just a different format, okay? You can create quizzes. There are some really fun websites like SurveyMonkey where you can do quizzes. So for example, let's say you're a museum. You could actually create a quiz to see, you know, give it out to all the people who may want to physically come into your museum in the future and say, you know, can you name, you know, the top 10 paintings of Van Gogh, okay? So that could be a quiz that you create. You can also do content around how it works. So, oops. Annika, I think you're still in the hello account. Sorry, everybody, I'm just gonna, okay, good, you can still see me, wonderful. So then you can have how it works content, right? So how it works content is where you actually show people behind the scenes exactly how your trade works, okay? So one example would be, I've seen a lot of art techs actually posting about all of the different types of hangings that they might use to put up art. So I think that was really great. And that is a great how it works example. And you could also do, you know, how it works for, this is great for conservation studios. You can actually walk through step by step how something is done. And you don't need to use new footage, new video, new images. You can just put up old images that you might find, right? That you might have in your archives, that you might collect from employees, and then just include more information in your text, okay? You also could do graphics, right? So it may not be a picture at all. It may just be an explanation that is included in the graphic. So, you know, it may be a graphic of a book, and then it says, you know, how do we conserve manuscripts? And then you have some information in the copy or in the caption of the text. So you may not need a picture at all. Then facts and history. So this is fantastic for anyone working in the art industry, because at some point in time, all of us touch art. Okay, in one way or another, there is artwork floating around, right? So whether we are a gallery or a shipper or whatever it happens to be, okay, you can put up images of artwork, whether it's artwork that you have handled or artwork that you have exhibited, and you can talk about its background, you can talk about its history. And this is something that people really enjoy right now. They enjoy this type of educational content, particularly, you know, for anyone from, you know, if you're a children's museum, there's so many kids who are at home right now who are not in school, all the way up through, you know, people who are just looking for something to entertain them during this period, something to occupy them. So facts and history, really, really great. source of content that you can, is pretty much endless, right? Then we have how-tos. So this I find particularly valuable. In order to create how-tos for original content, make a list of everything that you do in your organization. So let's say you conserve, I'm just trying to get my Q&A out of the way. Let's say that you conserve manuscripts, okay? So you probably have a really strong grasp on creating bindings, okay? So if you apply that to the civilian life, then you can actually take your skills and teach civilians who are stuck at home and bored how to do interesting and new skills and activities. So for example, if you are a manuscript conservationist, you may decide to teach people how to bind their own at-home books. Okay, so you could do a whole content series just teaching people on different binding methods, which for people who are in your audience is going to be very interesting and very engaging, and you can do it from home, sitting just like I am in your living room. Okay, so you don't need to find any new content, any pictures that may be living in your office that you can't get to, anything like that. You can do this at home, nothing else required. Same thing for shippers, right? You could talk about how do you pack art in a way that's going to keep it safe, even if you're doing it in a personal move. So again, if you can take your specialized industry skills and apply them to everyday life, that's a really good way to engage with your followers and with your users. Then we have quotes. Pull quotes from famous artists, from famous people in your industry, from famous curators, from famous art handlers, and you can use them in this original content. Short, meaningful, inspirational content is very moving for people, particularly in this period when we're scrolling through our phones and we're looking for something that's going to catch our attention. Polls are fantastic, even though my poll just didn't work, which is unfortunate, but polls are wonderful. And you can do them on a variety of social media platforms where you can say, which one do you like better? Or how would you do this? Or how do you think this is done, right? You can engage with your audience in a way that both asks them for opinion and gives them information, because they get to see the results of the polls too. Then we have virtual events. Now, just like this one, right? We created the ArtEvolve webinar series, and this would be a good example of creating original content that is not directly about the company and about the brand, but is much more about creating value for our audience and for our community. Okay, so you can hold virtual events, whether that's doing something sort of involved like we do, which is every week we have a different webinar with a different speaker, or it could just be something where you hold a virtual event. You could hold a virtual coffee with other people in the industry or other people in your sector. Or you could hold, you could do a live event. You could do a Facebook Live where you're talking about, conservation and where you think it's going to be going in the next 10 years. So there's a lot of different ways you can create virtual events. They don't have to be as formalized as, a webinar series. You can do them in a lot of different methods, and they can be very casual and very relatable. So here is an example of a piece of original content. Now, this would be, a manuscript conservation studio, something like that. And this is an image. It's not actually an image that belongs to them. They probably have never touched this particular manuscript because it is a very famous one. But they can, because they're engaging with, this is the material that they tend to work with, and their audience is going to be interested in this. They can actually engage them by saying, it's time to play Guess the Manuscript. Do you know which one this is? And then they're actually hopping onto a viral hashtag, which is Medieval Monday. So speaking of, does anyone know, can anyone guess what this manuscript is, just for fun? Anybody know? Pop it into the chat. Yes, yeah, Tasman, it's Lindisfarne. I tried to pick something that was pretty easy. It is the Cairo page from Lindisfarne. Nice one. Extra cookies for Tasman, thanks. So that would just be one example, right? And the point of original content is to give something valuable, whether it's entertainment or education, you might just be engaging with them like this. This is very simple. It's just something fun. Or you could be going to something much more detailed, like putting the Cairo page there and giving the entire history of the Lindisfarne Gospels in the description, right? You could go either way, and both of them are going to be valuable to your audience in different ways. Okay, number 3 is company content. Company content is about the organization itself and the people who work in it, and your objective, oh, this got cut off, I apologize. Your objective is to make your organization relatable. Okay, so creating company content. This is company news, behind the scenes, company goals, quotes from founders, from figureheads within your company. Company content is something that during this period, a lot of companies are creating because we're at home, right? And it's a very sort of particular environment in a particular period for us all across the world. And so, you may have news about when you're going to open or when you're going to close or when you're going to be able to work within certain countries. You may want to do a behind the scenes of what it's like to work at home. You may decide that you want to talk about your future company goals. Okay, so here's an example of that. Here we have Shipping International again. And we have Happy Earth Day. And they say this year we are looking to reduce our packing waste by 20%. What are your Earth Day goals? Earth Day, every day is Earth Day. So this would just be an example of a company talking about their goals. They didn't need to, be in the office to take any images. They didn't even need to be open to be able to post this, okay? So company content, particularly if you're talking about, engaging with your audience around your company's goals and your company's, beliefs and identity, this is something you can definitely do when your offices are not open. Number 4 is user-generated content. Now, this is something that is fantastic during this period because not only are you at home, but all of your users are at home and they are spending a lot of time on social media. So, content generated by users, of course, is user-generated content. This comes in 2 forms. Number 1 is that you request users to generate content, and then this requested content is created by your users. So it's a call and a response. Or there is unrequested user content out there in the world, okay? So for example, I could post asking people to, share their favorite memories at my museum, and then people will share all the favorite memories of my museum by tagging us in their caption. Or you might just go into the archives of Instagram or Facebook or Pinterest or Twitter and find old posts and share them, okay? So you can do a call and response, or you can go for unrequested user content. So here you go about, how do you go about collecting this content? Well, like I said, you can search for mentions and share existing user-generated content. You can hold contests, giveaways, or challenges. We'll look at that in a little bit. Contests and giveaways are really fun for more consumer-facing organizations. Challenges are great if you want to also get you and your partner organizations together, or your sector, you really want to connect them. So I remember there are like the Art Technician Olympics, right? And I think that in the past this happened in person, but perhaps this can be a challenge that you actually a challenge that you can actually implement on social media and have people take videos and do it from home. So Marian, where do you suggest the content is loaded? Instagram only or client emails? Good question. Would you pop that in the Q&A for me, Marian, so that we don't miss it at the end? Then the last option is just to ask your users to share memories, right? So if you're having a hard time finding some of those mentions from the past, then you can just ask, have you visited us? What are your favorite memories of visiting us in the past or working with us in the past? So here's an example here. This is a fictional museum of the world, but this picture is actually from the Vatican nearby, just my neighbor. And so they said this sweet photo was taken by, and then they give credit, right? So this is really important. For user-generated content, you always want to give credit to the person who created it, in November 2019. So it's not recent, but it's a great picture. It's still going to be engaging to people. It's still going to be interesting. It's still really sweet to have these little children, looking up at these ancient sculptures. We love that even the youngest among us enjoy our sculpture collection. Okay, so 5, curated content. Any content you share that isn't created by your brand or a user and your target audience. So again, a really great option right now if you don't have an extensive photo or video archive for your organization, you're not collecting a lot of content from your employees, curated content is a really great way to go because you don't have to actually create the content, you only have to comment on it. Okay, so let's look at how that works. You can collect media articles and videos that you can share. You can share content from partner organizations. You can look through viral hashtags, share content from that, or look through viral content and share content from that. Okay, so we'll definitely see some examples of this later on. Here's one. I know this is a little bit self-serving, but Museum of the World has shared the ArtEvolve weekly webinar series. So, it's often good to ask whoever you're sharing the content of, just to make sure that they're okay with it. You can do that in the comments of their post, but then you can say, hey, look, this is our partner, or these are an organization that we work with, and they're going to do a weekly webinar series. You should check it out. Okay, so you're still providing something of value for your followers, even if you haven't created the content itself, and that's okay, right? Your bandwidth might not be there to really create an original webinar series that happens every week, but you might be able to show them other webinar series that are happening that your partner organizations are putting on that are going to be of value to your audience too. Okay, so now we're going to talk about content themes. So, all of these different types of content are really great, and they're in a really easy way to organize and categorize the content that you're creating. But you're still thinking about your content as individual posts. You don't need to do that. It is too labor intensive, too time intensive, too energy intensive. The way that you should be thinking about content is in themes, okay? So you have a number of different options for themes. These are the ones that I recommend particularly for art institutions. Holidays, real world or internet holidays. So Earth Day would be one that goes across, but you could have Easter would be in the real world, and then, for example, there is National Puppy Day. This is an internet holiday, or National Donut Day, okay? Events like company events, exhibitions, parties, or openings. I know there's not a lot of physical events happening right now, but there may be virtual events happening right now, okay? So perhaps you have a virtual exhibition that you're putting on. This is a great content theme. Viral hashtags that are used on social media, already being used. Some of them are very popular, and some of them are used but not so popular. Maybe you can help make them more popular. So artists on Instagram, this is a huge one. There are over 1 million posts for this. Art shipping is more like 5,000 posts. Medieval Mondays, more like 500 posts, but I think this is a great one. So highly recommend to anyone who works with medieval artworks to jump on that bandwagon. Then educational topics. Create your own series of valuable content. So some examples are the Getty Challenge. So the Getty Museum has actually put out a challenge for people to create lookalikes of their artwork at home. So this would be a good example of an institution actually creating their own set of content. And so, by putting out the call for people to participate in the Getty Challenge, they've actually generated hundreds of posts that have been hashtagged with their museum, that have been hashtagged with the Getty Challenge, and it creates a lot of content without them needing to take more action and to take more time and energy to create content on their channels. They can just share what their followers are doing, right? Which is great and very useful. Then BKM Education, so this is the Brooklyn Museum. They do a weekly education series. They do a mini art lesson, I think mostly on Mondays. So that would be an example of a topic that you can do repeatedly, right? And then Ladies Who Handle It. I don't know if we have any handlers here, but this is something that is popular for women art handlers. And they use this hashtag whenever they're posting pictures of themselves handling artwork. So, there's a lot of educational topics that you can create yourself that don't necessarily have to relate to holidays, events, or viral hashtags. So when we're thinking about content and we're thinking about it in these themes, we're not just considering, okay, what am I going to post today? We're considering, okay, what am I going to post for Medieval Monday, let's say, every Monday into the foreseeable future, every Monday for the next 6 months. So you don't actually have to worry every Monday, what are you going to put up? You know exactly what the theme is. And all you have to do is just come up with, a different concept each week. So it makes it a lot easier to sort of streamline your thinking around social media and saves you time and takes less people to get it done. So here we have our content themes. We are now going to jump into our content plan. So again, you're going to receive this. It's just a spreadsheet, but it's pretty easy to use. Now let me just freeze these so that nothing goes funny. Okay. Okay, cool. So we have all of these different sections. Now it's fairly straightforward to use. You put your content theme in here, okay? Oh, clicking around when I shouldn't. You put your content theme in first, and then you put in the shorthand of that post name. It's just so that you know exactly what you're referencing, right? So for example, let's say we're going to use that, the Cairo page from the Lindisfarne Gospels. So our content theme here is actually Medieval Monday. Our shorthand is just going to be Lindisfarne, so we remember what it is. And then our posting date, you know, we're going to post it on the 5th of May. Audience segment, okay, who is this for? So this is a very important part of thinking about your content. You don't always have to use every single one of these sections if you're in a bit of a hurry, but this is, you know, sort of everything you might need in order to create really comprehensive and valuable content. So audience segment is, you know, you have a really large audience in most cases. You have a very varied audience in most cases. So what we want to think about here is not every one of your posts is going to speak to every single person in your audience. In most cases, it's going to speak to a smaller group. So, you know, this may speak to those who are educated in art and art history, right? So maybe art, you know, manuscript buffs. So these are the people who, you know their manuscripts. So this is my audience segment. Simple, 2 words. Then my content type. Okay, so my content type for this, does anyone remember? Content type of the Lindisfarne Gospels. You're welcome to put it in the chat. Yeah, it was original, exactly. Okay, so we have original, and then we're going to say what the medium is. So is it going to be a post? Is it going to be a story? Are you going to share it from somewhere else, right? So it's not yours, or maybe do a live video. Okay, so we have original. It's a post. I can describe it if I don't yet have an image or text for it yet. Okay, so if I just want to make a note of, so I remember what it's going to be in the future, if I need to make the graphic later or something like that, that's what the description is. Then I would link my picture, I would link my copy, and I would say exactly where it's going to go. So you can see for A, B, and C, these are the channels, and all I have to do is go, yep, it's going to go here, and it's going to go here. Okay, so let's say it's going to go on my Facebook and my Instagram. Done. And then my key metrics. This is what I'm measuring in order to figure out the success of this particular post. Now, I'm asking people to actually comment on the post, in the post itself, right? I'm saying, can you guess what this manuscript is? So my key metric might be the number of comments. And this is just so that as I'm going forward, you know, as I post, guess the manuscript, you know, Medieval Monday, maybe I even say guess the manuscript every Monday. So I make this even simpler on myself. I'm always going to be doing the same content theme, the same type of post. Then when I go over here to key metrics, I can measure week after week, you know, okay, so how did this go? How many comments did I get this week? How many comments did I get the last week? Am I using hashtags that are, you know, allowing people to find this particular post? Is this engaging for people? Is this interesting? And so that way you can make decisions going forward about what you might edit or change or revise about your concept, about your strategy. So this is very simple. All the descriptions are across the top. And then this way, you know, what I like to do is actually make each of these lines a different color. So let's say this is green, and then I'm going to have another one, which is, I'm going to have a challenge theme. Okay, so some themes are going to go for a period of time, like a challenge where you say, you know, we're going to run this challenge for this month. Some are going to happen periodically forever, for an unlimited amount of time. Okay, so for example, Medieval Monday happens every Monday regularly, every month throughout the year. Okay, so let's say we do a challenge, and I'm going to make this yellow. What that allows me to do is that in future, you know, if I also have other challenge posts that I develop, and I have other Medieval Monday posts, I can actually organize everything by this particular column, right? So I can sort my sheet, excuse me. I can sort my sheet here, and I can actually see, okay, how many posts do I have, this month for this challenge, and how many posts do I have for Medieval Monday? Now you can do your tabs by month. You can do them. You can just use one spreadsheet for everything. It's really up to you. I tend to organize them by month, but this just makes it really easy, because then, you can also organize it by what day your posting date, right? So you can see it in chronological order. You can then see it in content theme order. So you can see it in content type order to see if you're doing maybe too much brand content, or you haven't done any user generated content this month. So this really allows you to get a full picture without needing to use any, social media software in order to figure out how you're doing this month in terms of your organization. And the great thing about this is that, if you're planning this, you really only need to plan this one time each month. And you may not even need to plan it every month if your content is very clearly aligned in your themes, like the Guess the Manuscript, right? So your Guess the Manuscript next month is going to be the same it is this month. So you don't actually have to do any more planning. You only have to plan this one time, which means that you get to save a lot of time. And it's something that perhaps someone a little bit higher up can plan. And then, potentially you have an intern who is actually implementing it based on this plan. So it makes it very straightforward to implement and to manage, particularly when a team is remote and they're not used to working remote, or perhaps if you have less staff than normal. Okay, so make sure that you're including your questions in the Q&A. I'll come back to the content plan if there's any questions about that. I'm going to go back now to my presentation, and we're going to do a little bit together, and then I'll get back to questions. We have one more thing we're going to talk about, which is the IDA model. Now, the IDA model is actually a method for you to create great content, okay? It's a way to think about creating the content. There are 4 steps to it: attention, interest, desire, and action. Now, we'll go over each of these in detail, but this is how this works. Attention is, how do you make people stop? They're scrolling through their feed. What makes them stop? Interest is what makes them stay. Desire is what makes them want to act. And action is moving them forwards to the next step. Okay, so we'll actually do some examples together right now. Thank you, Darcy, I appreciate that. Okay, so what are our attention triggers? This is very important, and this information actually comes from studies of the brain. Okay, so what makes humans turn their head? What makes humans stop on a post, right? So this actually goes back to way back in our biology, relating to fight or flight, relating to us being predators and trying to deal with danger in our environment, okay? So what really helps us to get people's attention, users' attention, is number 1, colors and textures for emphasis, okay? So, we all know, for example, if you look at a really brightly colored snake, it's likely to be poisonous. That gets your attention. Same exact thing for when you're looking at a social media post. In fact, colors and textures gain your attention, particularly if you use them in a part of the post for emphasis. Movement gets our attention, just like way back in the day when we would see movement in the trees, movement in the brush. Same thing, movement gets our attention, whether it's perceived movement in an image, which we'll look at in a moment, or it's actually something moving like a video or a GIF. We also have faces. Humans react very, very well to faces. So if you can include faces in your content, let's say you have a picture of a manuscript that, I'm gonna keep going back to this, but with a manuscript being conserved, and in one of it, you just have the picture of the manuscript, and the other one, you have someone, turned over the manuscript actually doing the conservation, you should choose the second option, okay? Because humans like to see human faces. Then direction of gaze or of hands. Now, this is actually where we take cues, social cues from our environment. And this includes in images and in video. So in fact, if, let's say the thing that I want you to pay attention to is, I'm gonna hold up my mug, is my mug, and I'm looking the other direction. You are less likely to realize that this is the important item in the picture. Okay, so if I'm looking away from it, but this is what I actually want you to focus on, if I am the social media creator, I should actually have the person who's in the picture looking at the mug, okay? Because this will draw your attention as the user to the mug. Same thing with hands. If I'm pointing this way, and the mug, again, is the important item, then you're going to look where my hand is pointing and not at the important focus of the picture. If I'm pointing at the mug, you're much more likely to look at what I want to be the focus of the picture, okay? Now we have unusual size or place. Unusual size or place works like this. Unusual size would be if you have a human that's this big, right, standing next to a normal sized painting. Now, this is an unusual size of something. It catches our attention because it looks out of place. Same thing with unusual place, where let's say you have a human, but I always give, you know, when I teach at my university classes, because I'm a professor in digital marketing and communications, if I always give them the example that an unusual place would be if you saw me sitting underneath my desk, right? That would not be the normal place for the professor at the front of the classroom. Unexpected things are where you have something in a location that you would never expect to see it. So for example, there's a dinosaur in the museum. So this is something kind of fun that you can do if you have old video, if you have old photo archives, but you've used the pictures before. So, you know, for example, you can actually put something in the picture, like let's say a dinosaur, and ask people to find, you know, what's out of place, what's unexpected here. It's a fun way to engage with people, recycling old content without having to create anything new. Then we're going to go through and do a couple examples together, and I'll get into questions. Okay, so this is actually our first ArtEvolve webinar that we ever did. But I always follow the ADA model, so I thought I'd use this as the first one, and then I promise no more extraneous ArtEvolve promotion. So we have IDA. So we have the A is make them stop. So what makes them stop? Well, in this case, which attention trigger do you think I have going here? So we have color, movement, faces, direction, unusual size and place, or inspected things. So what A do you think I've used here? I'd love to see what your thoughts are in the chat. Is it color? Is it texture? Is it movement? Is it direction of hands? Color, definitely. Yeah, so when I mentioned color as the top, right, as a for emphasis, instead of having the whole picture be red and orange, there are certain shipping containers on the ship that are red and orange against the blue background, which actually makes them pop better to the human eye, okay? So we have both color, and a lot of people mention movement, exactly that implied movement in the image. You can see the water moving, you know that the ship is moving forwards, okay? So that would be number one. Then we have what makes them stay. Well, for people who are in my target audience, the art supply chain, you know, during COVID-19 is going to be something that is very, very relevant to me. So I'm like, oh, okay, tell me more. I'd like to learn more about what's happening here. And then desire is make them want to act. So my end action, which you can see here at the bottom of the text, is register now with the link in our bio. So that would be moving them forward to the next step. I want them to register for the webinar. Now, how do I make them want to do that? Well, you know, I tell them it's going to be the launch of our series. We have a guest speaker who's from ARTA, which if you're in the field, you may have heard of them before, right? So there's a lot of ways that I can sort of get them to desire to take that action, and then I push them and I tell them what the action is, okay? So register now with the link in our bio. You always want to tell them what that action is. You want to move them in the direction of that action, move them forwards. Okay, so here's another one. I thought this one was kind of fun. This is from the MN Marine Art Museum, and this is actually the Getty Challenge that I was talking about. So this is actually one museum taking part in another museum's challenge. All right, so if we think about what type of content this is, do you think it's brand or original, company, user-generated, or curated? What do you think? Original. Yeah. So, you know, these are not always 100% different. Sometimes you're gonna have a little bit of overlap between one type of content and another. So for example, some of you are saying original and some are saying company. So this is actually coming from an employee of the museum. In that case, then, well, you know, you could kind of consider it along the lines of company because we're talking about developing that relationship with the employee, but it is original, right? Because they've actually participated in this challenge and created their own image. Okay, so they've created their own content and they're participating in the Getty challenge. So what would be our attention here? Is it color? Is it movement? Is it direction? Is it one of the other options, right? We could potentially have unusual place, unusual size, unexpected things. Anyone? What do you guys think? Unexpected things? Yeah, I think it's unexpected things. Who would expect a Playmobil to be part of, you know, John Cudor's tavern scene? So in this case, we have unexpected things, which is really fun. And it's something, oh, what's that? You know, what's going on? So before you even read the text, the picture actually gets your attention. The I, what makes them stay is, oh, the Getty Museum has done a challenge, so maybe you want to read more about it. What's this challenge? What is this artwork? Then what does the D make them act? Well, in this case, the museum didn't put an action. So it's always best to put an action there as best as you can, right? Do you want them to share it? Do you want them to comment on it? Do you want them to participate in the challenge too? Okay, so move them forwards somehow. Don't just have them, you know, read and forget your post. Give them something to do. Have an action for them to take. Great question, Stephanie. Will you pop that into the Q&A for me? Okay, we have one more, and then I'm going to pop over to questions. So this here, has anyone heard of the Piggenheim Museum? It is now a world famous institution. Yes. So this is something that went viral. This is viral content. Third Place Commons did not create this. This was something that was posted on a website called Viral Panda, Board Panda, excuse me. And all they did was share it with their own commentary on it, okay? So this is really fun because they actually, instead of just sharing the image, instead of just sharing the link, they actually put the picture too, okay? So the picture gets your attention, particularly because most likely you have the unusual size, right? And you have the unexpected things. So unusual size is the, you know, the scream, which is very small and on a baseboard, and then the unexpected things, which is you don't really expect a guinea pig to be at a museum. So there you go. Then you have the interest, which is making them stay. Well, Third Place Commons says a nexus of art lovers, animal lovers, and quarantine creators. This is some really great copy, I would say. So it just really keeps you engaged. They're kind of telling a story. Then make them want to act. So take a stroll through this impressive collection. They've told you what they want you to do. They've talked about, you know, the smallest, hairiest of art lovers. It sounds really cute if you're in the particular audience segment that this would appeal to, right? Animal lovers. And then take a stroll through this impressive collection. What do they want you to do? They want you to click. So that's how you move them forwards. You're giving them this piece of content. It's not yours, but it's still valuable. It's still entertaining for your audience segment. Okay, so I have done all of this. We've gone through all of our examples, and I'm now going to take a minute to answer some of these questions. So please, if anyone else has questions, pop it into the Q&A, and we will get started. Okay, Vanessa, how do you manage photo usage rights? Great question. So in a lot of cases, particularly when you're talking about very famous artworks, you are going to probably be able to find, a Creative Commons version of that artwork if you'd like to share it. In terms of sharing partner content or sharing user content, you just have to ask. So you would be surprised how many partner organizations and how many users would be more than willing for you to share their content, particularly because it's, you know, like free promotion for them. It's other people get to see their content that wouldn't normally see it. So the best thing to do is always just to ask. If they say no, they say no, and you find another partner or another user that, that you think has something that you would like to share. But that's a good question. Okay. Madeline, do you have suggestions about sharing when most projects are confidential? We're a private conservation studio. This is a great question. So I think that you can do a lot of how it works. So you can talk about how you actually do your conservation processes. You can show all your tools. but you don't necessarily have to show the exact projects that you're working on, right? You can talk a lot more about your trade rather than talking about the specific projects. And then, you know, some of your curated content might be talking about some of the most interesting, famous conservation works that are going on right now in the world, right? So you may make commentary on recent conservation that has been done on very famous artworks. Alexandra, we have a question from our team about how you set up the Zoom call with this chat. We'd love to utilize this feature for artist talks. That's a great question. We actually have a Zoom webinar license. They are fairly affordable, particularly if you want 100 or less participants. So if you go and check out the zoom.us website, then you should be able to find all the information that you need. Burley, is there a sharing etiquette outside of crediting? Yes, just like we mentioned just before, it's good practice to ask, unless someone has said somewhere in their caption or somewhere in their copy that you know, you can please share, you know, if you will. But otherwise, it's always good to ask, unless, you know, you have an agreement with another organization that you can sort of share at will, which is not a bad thing to do, right? You might actually kind of create a pod of institutions that you can share content between without having to ask. That's a really great thing to do. And just create like a WhatsApp group or something like that where you can communicate about it. Okay, Alexander, I'm going to come back to you in a moment. Okay, oh, we have two Alexandras. Alexandra Bass, I'll come back to you in a moment. Alexandra, other Alexandra, I will answer now. Hi, I've just moved. I'm going to start my business basically from scratch. So I'm not some big public institution or established company. Are there some advice or tips how to get followers and how to spread the awareness of my new business? Quality content. So exactly what we're talking about now is what you can start even if you have 0 followers. The way that you get followers and you maintain followers instead of just, you know, having them like your page and then never looking at something that you've created ever again is to really give them value. So think about, you know, using that inbound marketing mindset. Liza co-founded a small business called Cura, which is the best advice you can give to getting our brand out there on social media. We cannot share photos. Most of the work we do on Instagram because we work with private art collectors that need to remain confidential. Sure. So like I mentioned to the other arts conservation studio, you can consider talking about more of your trade rather than anything else, and then doing curated content. The other thing too is to really get personal. If there's only 2 of you, then have both of you actually be the face of the organization, right? You can do it from your perspective because there's just the 2 of you. So if you actually sort of develop your storytelling on the platform, whatever platforms you're on, about the 2 of you and your work as conservationists, rather than just being the Cura Conservation Studio, you may find that you can connect better with your followers and it's more relatable. Okay. Marianne, where do you suggest the content is loaded? Instagram only or client emails? So I think, I guess I'm trying to understand exactly what content you're talking about. If you have like a blog, for example, that can go in all sorts of places, including client emails. However, if you just have images that you're sharing, you know, if you're doing sort of the history of an object or something like that, then I would recommend, you know, mostly keeping that on social media. Okay, Sarah, I've noticed that a lot of arts orgs don't post on Twitter that much anymore, and we don't get as much engagement in Twitter as we do on Facebook and Instagram. Is Twitter dead for arts promotion? I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that Twitter has, you know, gotten a lot bigger and is used particularly in these days for sort of urgent news. So, you know, I don't think it's necessarily dead for arts promotion, but if you're finding that you're getting more engagement on other platforms, then stick with those platforms, right? So social media strategy and digital marketing overall, it's about testing. So if you are working on all 3 platforms and you find that Facebook and Instagram are working better for you, that's fine. You know, it may be that another institution, Twitter is working better for them. So it could just be the particular niche you're in. It could be the particular industry you're in. It could be where your audience tends to spend their time. But, you know, it's always worth it to explore Twitter and sort of see. What I always recommend doing is looking at what your competitors are doing and then try to go from there in terms of looking at, you know, how successful or unsuccessful they've been. Okay, Renee, How do you organize follow-ups, have people mail questions, or can a goal be creating a mailing list? And how do you make sure people do not get on mailing lists on which they do not want to be? Good question. So if you would like to, I think I'm trying to understand if you're creating, Renee, would you mind actually clarifying that for me? Are you talking about when you're holding virtual events? I would guess that this is what you're discussing, but is it about virtual events? Okay, great. So when we hold virtual events, for example, we always send out the recording, right? And so that is our only sort of follow-up with people. And then we'll send them invites in future to the same event series if they have come to a prior event series. You know, you always have to be careful how you approach your audience, particularly if they've come to you for content that is free. So I think it just, you know, really depends on the specific case, but I always do recommend that, you know, before you approach anyone in a sales capacity as a company who has first come to you for your, you know, free content, that you should, you know, have developed a relationship with them to the point that you know that, that approach is not going to be unwanted. Yeah. Okay, Darcy, is it difficult to get virtual viewers to go to that next step of following through with C-Link and bio? You know, no, I think people are pretty used to it. So that's a good question. I definitely like using the GIFs that say C-Link and bio when I do stories. So you can search that in the story section. So that way people are really aware that that is where they have to go in order to get the information. But yeah, I think people are used to that at this point. Okay, Katrina, do you find social media scheduling tools helpful, or does your spreadsheet example meet your needs? I personally don't use social media scheduling tools. I find, you know, one thing that kind of bothers me about it as a social media manager is that when it says, you know, this was posted by, let's say, Buffer, that's not necessarily bad, particularly if it saves you time. But at the same time, it also looks more automated and less personal. So it really depends. The other thing too is that sometimes, you know, when you create formatting on a social media scheduling tool, and then it gets put onto various platforms, you might not realize that, you know, something's going to get cut off, or the image gets cut in half, or something when you put it on more than one platform that have different formats. So that's just something to be aware of. You know, when you think of scheduling tools, there are, you know, some scheduling tools out there that are really great and are really helpful, particularly if you're putting a lot of content out there. But it's just something you should kind of think about to make sure that you're not just putting stuff out there that may not come out optimized for the user. Okay, trying to get through as many of these as we can. Stephanie, relating to image size on Getty example you used, are there some image guidelines? Would you usually aim for simple and clean? Is there any best practice on this? So, you know, I think it's, back in the day, let's say a couple of years ago, most brands would go with brand content also in the line of photography and video, that everything had to look clean, professional, and commercial. Okay, I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore, particularly when you're sharing, you know, sort of very casual content like that Getty challenge. That picture was taken by someone in their home, and, you know, during COVID-19. So during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I don't think necessarily it has to be perfect all the time. It is good if the image quality is as high as it can be, but also be aware that some of these platforms do decrease the image quality when you upload things. So it's not always under your control. Do the best you can, but I would say, you know, good and posted is better than perfect and late. Okay. Faye, if you're posting on behalf of a contemporary artist with her agreement, would you note that the posts are not being published by the artist herself? No. If you're posting on her channel, then you are just the intermediary. It is still her channel and it's coming from her brand. So I would consider in that case, the artist herself is a brand. And then therefore you don't need to sort of note yourself as being the poster. Just like, you know, when you have an organization, you have multiple people posting on social media, they don't necessarily say, oh, this is Mackenzie, this is Annika, right? You just have the brand posting as one entity. Okay, let's see. Alexandra, would it be great to talk about more hashtags, which ones you found are most successful? This is a great question. It depends entirely on what topic you're posting about. So I always try to use hashtags that are not general, but specific to the topic. So for example, if I'm posting something about art technology, then I'm going to use a lot more technology hashtags. if I'm posting something about, that's for shipping and shippers, then I'm going to use a bunch of shipping hashtags. If I'm posting something that is specifically, for museums, I'm going to use museum hashtags. So I always recommend that you use specific hashtags that match that specific content. Otherwise, you're just going to get lost in the sea of whatever 13 million hashtag arts. Okay, Darcy, how do you feel about stories on Instagram? Thoughts on how to navigate that section? Stories are great. If you don't have time to put together fantastic extra stories, guess what? You can share your posts as stories. So if you go down to your post, there's like a little a paper airplane symbol. If you click on that, it'll actually allow you to share that post to your story, and you can just add a little bit of text, a fun blinking GIF, whatever it happens to be, okay? And then what that means is that you kind of get double the content without actually needing to post 2 different pieces of content. Okay, I'll do a couple more and then we will finish up for today. Thank you everyone for sticking on, the 89 who are still here. Oh, okay, Sheila, any absolute no-nos on Instagram? So I think my biggest no-no on any platform is to do 100% brand content. So that's why I like to give those categories and have anyone who's posting on social media, developing social media strategy, think about their content in those 5 categories, is because any brand or any person that's just selling, or pushing their product or their brand on their customers, it's going to get tiring for the users. So I definitely, would look at having brand content not be the majority of your content, and really consider implementing the original, the company, the user generated, and the curated. And that is my biggest recommendation on any platform. Louisa, do you have any recommendations for online courses or books to learn more about this topic? My university course, just kidding. So yes, certainly there are a lot of resources out there. The first place I would recommend that you look is actually a book called The Art of Social Media, which is by the former head of branding at Apple and now the current head of brand and big investor at Canva. So The Art of Social Media. It's actually the textbook I use, but it's about this thick and it's very easy to follow, by Guy Kawasaki. Okay, Lydia, how would you advise YouTube, Insta Stories, or IGTV for engagement? We use our posts on Insta mostly to visually document our work. Thank you. Great question. You can use all of them. So you can repurpose your content, right? So you can use the content you put on IGTV. You can also consider putting some of that on, putting different types of content like that on YouTube. So I don't think you necessarily have to put different content in all of those different places. You can consider about doing some overlap. Last 2, Stephanie, what % click-through rate would you expect from see link in bio? This is a great question. The answer is entirely depends. Depends on your follower count. It depends on how engaged your followers are. It depends on what industry you're in. So, for example, people who are large influencers in the beauty world, where Instagram is huge and the users are very tech savvy, are much more likely to have a higher click-through rate than, let's say, some corners of the art world where we're still sort of gearing up into the technology age. So that's a great question. I would say the best way to figure out what your best click-through rate is to start testing. So start to use the see link in bio, see how many clicks you get, measure them using UTMs and Google Analytics, and then use your first data that you get as your baseline and just try to improve it from there. That's the best you can do, right? Last one, Nikki. How do you recommend integrating stories into your social media plan? Would you share your posts as stories or keep them as separate content? I recommend, particularly if you're low on time, share your posts as stories with just some additional graphics or text to highlight important elements. You can also create separate content. I think a really great way to use stories is curated content, particularly for partners. So, one thing that I love to do, particularly in these days, is, we have a lot of Artcheck partners who actually are sharing their online viewing rooms or their virtual exhibitions or their, virtual collections or their, VR walkthroughs, whatever they are. And I like to, share those posts as stories. so that I can sort of, get the word out about what some of our partners are doing. Okay. All right, that is all the questions for today. Thank you very much to everyone who stuck around the extra 13 minutes. Professor Mackenzie, thank you, Thomas. I really appreciate all of you coming today, and I hope that was helpful. I will definitely be emailing out the recording tomorrow, as well as the PowerPoint presentation, which you will get a copy of, and of course the content plan template, which you are more than welcome to use. So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. Be well.